Remember on your test, you don't have to do all levels. I'm going to zip through all three of them really fast so you can make sure that you know how to do them. Okay, so the first one, the biggest perfect square was radical 36. And then you had radical 36 and 5. Remember, radical 36 is perfect, so you changed him into plus or minus 6. Radical 5. I'm recording, so try to not say weird stuff. Okay, that is the final answer. Remember, you will only get half credit if you don't have the plus or minus, so you need to remember that. Second one, the biggest perfect square that went into this one was radical 16, and we had radical 6. Remember, you're bringing the 7 down for the ride. Don't forget about him. Square root of 16 is plus or minus 4. And remember, you're going to multiply it by 7, and then we have this radical 6. Then you multiplied these two together, so you got positive or negative 28. Radical 6. Good for that one? Last one. Neither of those simplified. But you're not allowed to have radical 7 on the bottom, so the trick is to multiply the top and the bottom by radical 7. So then you get radical 28 on the top and radical 49 on the bottom. You do that because now you have a perfect square on the bottom. So you can take the square root of 49, and that is just going to be turned into a plus or minus 7. But the radical 28, you're going to have to go off to the side and simplify him. So radical 28, the biggest perfect square is radical 4 times radical 7, and that's a plus or minus 2 radical 7. So this ends up on the top, you have, it's going to be plus or minus. On the top, you have 2 radical 7. And on the bottom, the square root of 49 is just 7. And the plus or minus could be out front. It could be on the top or the bottom or wherever. You don't need to repeat it everywhere. Question. How did you do it? Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can simplify. If you simplify first, every now and then after you multiply, you might have to simplify a second time, which is fine. You still can. You know what I mean? Just whenever you simplify early, check your final stuff under the radical and see if anything can be simplified again, because it might be true that way. Depends on how big the numbers are. These numbers are small, so you're okay. Okay, does anyone need a picture of that, or you're all good on all 3 kinds? Remember, when you take your test, I would do at least 2 of them. If you have time, do all 3. That way you're sure, because you'll get the highest grade that you get correct. Okay. Next one. I'm going to set a 6-minute timer. So if you forgot how to do this, look at page 84. These are the ones that don't have the x squared and the x. So that means you can instead put squiggly, get everyone, isolate your variable, and take square roots of both sides. So these ones are not quadratic formula ones. Look at page 84. down to the very last senior grade review on Wednesday. You don't. These are not the ones where you set it equal to 0. Look at page 84 of your stuff. These you do not. You're not doing quadratic formula. Instead, you are putting squiggly down the middle and getting the v squared by itself, and then taking the square root of both sides. Remember, when you have that fraction, if you get a decimal, you don't turn it to a decimal. Instead, you take the big giant radical. You actually have examples of this in your spiral. So flip back a couple pages. You radical the whole big ugly fraction. And then split radical. Remember? No, not quadratic. I wish you guys would look at page 84. I've seen if you got on. You're not gonna if you. So remember when you have that, I'm just gonna put it down. Okay, that's 6 minutes, so I'm going to zip through all of them. Oh, wait. We want to make sure we have enough time to finish all of them. So remember, if there is an x, if there's an x squared but no x, does that make sense? So you see how this has a v squared but no v. So when that happens, you just keep the v squared on the side by himself. So I'm going to minus 1 on both sides, and then I'm going to get 7v squared equals 28. I'm going to divide by 7, and I get v squared equals 4. That one divides out evenly, so you're fine. Just leave it as b squared equals 4. And now, since b is isolated now, you can take the square root of both sides, and you're going to get b is equal to positive or negative 2. And that's all you're going to do for that one. Next one. Once again, this one has an n squared, but no n. So I'm going to get n squared by itself. Don't lose negatives. That negative is attached to the 4, correct? If you need to do plus negative so you remember, do that. Because clearly people lose that. So you're going to minus 18 on this side and minus 18 on that side. You're going to get negative 4n squared is equal to negative 50? 49. Okay. Then we're going to divide both sides by negative 4. And we get n squared equals, if you put this in your calculator, it comes out as a decimal, so you don't change it to a decimal, but negative over negative is equal to positive, so it just turns into 49 over 4. We do not change it to a decimal. So now we have n squared by itself. We're going to take the square root of both sides. Square root, square root. And remember, when we take the square root of this, if they're both perfect squares, remember this is the same as radical 49 over radical 4. Are those both perfect squares? Okay, so if they're both perfect squares, simplify them. You got to check, because if things are perfect, clear them out right now, right? If they weren't perfect, we might have to break these down and multiply by the bottom, blah, blah, blah. But we're going to end up with just positive or negative 7 over 2, because those are both perfect squares. Don't forget the positive, negative. The last one. We need to get all our q's on one side because we have a q squared, but not any q's, right? So I'm going to subtract 3q squared on both sides. And I'm going to get 9q squared minus 5 equals 175. I'm going to add 5 to both sides. And I'm going to get 9q squared equals 180. And then I'm going to divide by 9, and I'm going to get q squared equals 20. Right there is just algebra 1. I'm just getting the q on the side by itself. Scoot. The tables are on wheels. Move your table over some. Sit in the I divided. What? Where? Up here? Yeah, I did. And minus, there's 3q from this and minus 3q from that. Did I make a mistake? Am I good? Okay. And then the last step, I'm going to square root both sides. Square root of 20 is not perfect, so I'm just going to break him down. What's the biggest perfect square that goes in there? Radical 4 times radical 5. So I'm going to get positive negative 2 radical 5. So my final answer is q equals positive or negative 2 radical 5. If you need a picture, make sure you get what you need. Everyone good? Yeah? Okay, what level can you do? Just A? You don't want... Okay, you always do a backup plan. Make sure you can do a couple. Okay. Last set. These are quadratic formulas. So if you read the directions, I'll set a timer for you. Your quadratic formula is in your notebook and on the worksheet, and I wrote it right here on the board if you need it. Yes. Does anyone else have their exam? There are extras up on the case up there if you happen to need one. Remember, you are all exempt, but you need to bring your paperback signs. Get a marker out of the pencil polish and write it on your hand right now. You might notice something. Figure it out. Go look at Fisher out there. Go look in the window. Okay. Well, if you saw his and you saw mine, you should be able to piece it together. Did you see Towns?
Yeah.
Okay. Then you should be able to piece it together. Not wrong. On the bottom.
Workout? Oh, that's what she got from her house. Are you be working out, Casper?
Do you guys want to see my big muscles?
Wait, can I ask you?
Period. Yes,
Whatever you guys want to arm wrestle. I can no. Because you're gonna take pictures. Okay, you ready?
No. I'm on the left.
I'll give you about 30 more seconds. And then I'll do all three of them.
That's not gonna
Since Khalil says I can go ahead, I will. Okay, so the first one, remember that you need to have 0 on one side before you start. The first one, the C level's all set up for you. So you could just name your ABC. So, but you do have to remember that's an invisible 1 and that's a negative. So A is 1, B is -4, and C is 4. Most common mistake, obviously, is that people forget negatives. So be careful with those. Okay, so our formula says we start with the opposite of B. So we need negative of B. So if we look at B, it already is a negative, right? So we need basically a -4, right? And obviously that's going to be a plus. So if you went straight to plus, that's fine. Plus or minus. Square root, we have -4 squared. If you lose those parentheses, you will get the wrong answer. So keep stuff in parentheses, especially anytime you square negatives ever in the whole wide world. -4 times A times C, all over 2 times A. So that is me plugging in before I calculate. So that's going to be a +4, plus or minus square root of 0 over 2. Square root of 0 can be simplified. Square root of 0 is just 0. So this is equal to 0. So that means I could do my split, and it's going to be a 4 plus 0 over 2 and a 4 minus 0 over 2. Don't do weird things in your calculator. You have to do the top first before you can divide by the bottom number. If you just type stuff in your calculator, you get weird answers. Don't do that. 4 plus 0 is what? 4 over 2, and that equals 2. 4 minus 0 is still 4 over 2. So 4 over 2 is 2. So we only have one solution. The solution is 2. And remember, in our foldable, we said if you end up with 0 under the radical, you already know there's only going to be one solution, right? So the solution is x equals 2. That's it. Okay, next one. This one is not in the correct form. We need to get a 0 on one side, so probably +7 on both sides. Remember to don't combine unlike terms. None of these are like terms on the left, so I'm going to put them in order, highest powers first, so that way I have standard form. So this is me in standard form. That is not a -7 because we added 7 to both sides to get it on the other side. Remember, if you don't, remember we need 0 over here, so we had to +7 on both sides. Remember, if you skip that step, you're going to have somebody the wrong sign. So that means our A is 2, our B is 9, and our C is 7. There are no negatives. starting our formula, we want the opposite of b, or negative b. So we have negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 9 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. That's me plugging in. Remember, when you put stuff in your calculator, you're only putting from the parentheses to the parentheses in. Don't put that radical sign. So if you plug that in, and remember on your test, plug it in twice, especially if you're doing 1 or 2 problems. One little typo, and you have it wrong. So what'd you end up underneath that? 25. He's perfect. I must scroll a little bit just so we have some room. So we got negative 9 plus or minus radical 25 over 4. Radical 25 is perfect, so he can simplify to just a 5. So we end up with negative 9 plus or minus 5 over 4. And you can do your split. So we have negative 9 plus 5 over 4 and negative 9 minus 5 over 4. Once again, don't just put these straight up in your calculator. You will get the wrong answer. Negative 9 plus 5 is negative 4 over 4 is negative 1. Negative 9 minus 5 is negative 14 over 4. 14 over 4 was that? Negative 3.5. Does that sound right? Negative 3.5? Good. The last one. Gonna have to write it at the bottom. The last one we had 8n squared plus 4n minus 16 equals negative n squared. So we need to get this guy on the other side. He's an invisible negative 1, right? So we're going to plus 1n squared on this side and plus 1n squared on this side with his bestie. And I end up with 9n squared plus 4n minus 16 equals 0. So I have my ABC. My A is 9, my B is 4, and my C is negative 16. Plugging him in, we've got a negative 4 plus or minus square root of 4 squared minus 4 times 9 times negative 16, all divided by 2 times 9. Okay, am I plugged in okay? You got to put that junk in your calculator. And I get 572. Okay, so I have negative 4 plus or minus radical 572 over 18. Clearly, you're going to have to probably make your perfect square list, right? Crank them out down the side of your paper. 1 times 1 is 2 times 2 is 3 times 3, blah, blah, blah. You need the biggest perfect square that goes into 572. I will write that over here. I'm breaking down 572 because he is not perfect. You just put him in your calculator, square root of 572, and see if he's perfect first, but he's not. So my biggest perfect square that actually goes in here is radical 16, if you started trying them, times radical 37. So that turns into positive or negative 4 radical 37. It is a 9. It's a 9. I just wrote that when someone said it. This is a 9. It's 592. I thought someone said 572. Okay. So that is going to be replacing this right here, correct? So he turns into negative 4 plus or minus 4 radical 37 over 18. And remember what I said, if you have the whole numbers, if there's a number that goes into all of the whole numbers, you can divide it out to simplify. So what are the whole numbers in this problem? 4, 4, and 18. Is there a number that divides evenly into all three of those numbers? What? 2. So divide each one of those numbers by 2. Divide this 4 by 2, divide this by 2, and divide this by 2, and you'll get your final answer. My final answer is going to be -2 plus or minus 2 radical 37 all over 9. And you can write that as 2 guys if you want, or you can leave it like that because 37 doesn't simplify, so that is the end of the line. All the way simplified. Okay, if you need a picture of this one, take it, and I'll scroll back up, so if anybody needs the last 2. And I will post this video. In case you want to listen to yourselves again. Okay, here's the other 2. If you need either of these 2. No one needs a picture?